There was a grandfather who was spending some time at his grandson's house with mom and dad, and one morning as he was walking down the hall, he was going by his little grandson's room. He heard something. He looked in, and this junior was standing there with his hands lifting up, saying, Papa, Papa, up, Papa. Wanted to get out of his little crib. So what's the grandpa going to do, man? So he begins to walk over there, and all of a sudden, Mom peeks in the door. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. You weren't good. You were bad, and you're being punished. You cannot get out of your crib. So Grandpa's standing there, the little kid's hands lifted up, saying, Papa, Papa, up. And Mom's standing at the door saying he's not getting out of the crib. So what do you do as Grandpa? You just walk over and get in the crib with him, you know. Isn't that what God did with us? He didn't just stay on the outside and say, well, I know you need help. Get that. That might be the grandpa, or it might be somebody calling. And, but he got in the crib with us. He stepped over and got with us and began to deal with us. We're going to talk about that a little bit this morning. If you turn with me, if you're not there, Matthew chapter 26. So keep your fingers kind of nimble a little bit. We're going to run through some verses, in all of them in Matthew, I believe, but just kind of stay with me here. 26 verse 1. Now it came to pass, you know how exciting it is to sit up here and open the Bible and be with my family and talk about the Word and talk about what Jesus is doing. My prayer right now has been that as I share on Sunday mornings, that I want to share from what's going on in my life, from the Word, teach the Word, but from a perspective of this is what God is saying to me. This is what I'm learning. This is what's going on. And somehow we can grow together for a while. And we can watch him, you know, and hear from him for all of us in the same areas. So now it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings that he had said to his disciples, you know that after 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. Now, this is not the first time he's told them that. He's told them that several times over and over and over again. In fact, let's just kind of walk through the little Bible walk with me. Would you turn over to chapter 16 first, all right? See some events where some times when he shared these things. Chapter 16, we're going to pick it up at verse, I'll pick it up verse 15. He said to them, but who do you say that I am? So Simon Peter answered, and he said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Drop down to verse 21. From that time, Jesus began to show to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised the third day. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men. Now, the next time he talks about what's going to happen with him is at the Transfiguration over in chapter 17. The Transfiguration has happened, and as the three guys are walking down with Jesus, he says to them in verse 9, now as they came down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, saying, tell the vision to no one until the Son of God, the Son of Man, is risen from the dead. Drop down to verse 22. Now, while they were staying in Galilee, Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised up. And they were exceedingly sorrowful. Well, some time passes now, and they head for Jerusalem. Pick it up in chapter 20. Go over a couple of chapters. Chapter 20. You're going to work your finger down to about verse, let's see where we are. Let's see where we're going to be. Verse 17, now Jesus, going up to Jerusalem, took the 12 disciples aside on the road and said to them, behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and to the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify, and the third day he will rise again. In the next time he mentions this, the next story, the mom of James and John goes to Jesus and asks him permission if he would kind of favor her sons. And he talks about that. Then drop down to verse 28. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and again to give his life a ransom to many. And then turn back over to chapter 26, where we started, where we're going to be this morning. And pick it up at verse 3. Then the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people assembled at the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and plotted to take Jesus by trickery and kill him. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people. I like this. Jesus has said over and over and over again that it's going to happen during the Feast of Passover. This is when it's going to happen. He's told his disciples time after time after time, and now the great religious leaders are plotting and saying, we're going to take him and kill him, but we're not going to do it during the feast because there would be an uproar. Did you notice that God always has his way? Men, no matter how great they are, no matter who they are, God will always use their plans to accomplish his purpose. I was communicating with somebody this morning who had to make a major decision, has to make a major decision over a mom who is kind of hanging on. And I was able to share with this individual that here's the deal, man. You pray, you seek God, you do what you believe God is saying, and then let it go, because God is still in charge. If you make the wrong decision, he's still got it covered. If you make the wrong choice, he's still there. And so we can trust him, but we need to do what we think, but knowing that if sometimes we get to situations and we're just kind of freaked out because we don't know which direction to go. We don't want to make the wrong decision. Our whole world is going to fall apart. That's not the God that we serve. If you make the wrong decision, he'll work on it now. He'll work with it. He'll begin to do what he needs to do to work that out for his glory. And that's what he's doing with these people. Now, they heard this truth that Jesus was going to go to Jerusalem. He was going to be arrested. He had talked about being scourged. He was going to die. The third day was going to rise again. Now, they heard it, but to them it was kind of an annoyance. They were hoping that this wouldn't happen, that it would just kind of go away. That's why Peter rebuked him when he said it again this time. And he said, now, wait a minute. Hey, we're not going there. This isn't going to happen to you. And Jesus had to say to him, hey, get behind me, Satan. That's my purpose for coming. This is the reason that I'm here. You haven't understood what I've been telling you. You haven't understood my purpose of going to Jerusalem and this all being accomplished. So we understand that the cross was not an annoyance. The cross became the very fulcrum. It became the very center of everything. It's the cross that is the middle, is the center, is the core, the strength of Christianity itself. And we're going to see that here in a minute. Pick it up at verse 6. And when Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him having an alabaster flask of very costly fragrant oil, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. But when his disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, why this waste? For this fragrant oil might have been sold for much and given to the poor. But when Jesus was aware of it, he said to them, why do you trouble this woman? For she has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, but me you do not have always. For in pouring this fragrant oil on my body, she did it for my burial. Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her. This oil, it says this oil was worth a year's wage. Just think about a year's wage today. I mean, we look at that and say, well, that was probably a lot, but a year's wage. Well, whatever an average wage is today. I don't know, take $20,000, $25,000. That's what this was worth. It had to be an heirloom. It had to be something that had been passed down from generation to generation to be used for a special occasion. Now remember, her brother Lazarus had died and was buried, and she didn't use this oil for him. All right, it was still kept on the shelf. Why? Why did we saw a little video, but let's take it a little deeper. Why did Mary do this? I think that Mary had listened to Jesus. I think Mary was the one that was sitting at his feet at another time, and well, Martha was taking care of business of feeding and so forth, the people, but Mary always listened. She was there, and she was the one that heard. Now, I believe that she heard something, and it touched her heart that the disciples didn't hear. She understood when he said, I believe she understood when he said, I'm going to Jerusalem, and I'm going to die. I'm going to be killed. It's going to be over, man, for me, for that period of time. 3 days, I'm going to rise again, but this is going to happen. I'm going to be scourged. I'm going to go through pain. She got it because he says, why are you hassling her? She's preparing me for my burial. So that's why I believe a lot of the commentaries say, she was just kind of doing this and she didn't really anticipate what she was doing. I really believe she did. I really believe she'd heard. Why did she hear? Because she was the one that was, when Jesus would speak, when Jesus would talk, when Jesus would minister, Mary was always there listening to every single thing that he said and taking it all in, listening to him. Think of the scene for a moment. This is a dinner, and we're told more of this story, a lot of it in John chapters 11 and 12, that we don't hear in Matthew. But we hear in this story that it was at the house of Simon the leper. This had to be Simon the former leper. Jesus had healed him. He was no longer a leper, or they wouldn't have been in his house. So he had been healed. Lazarus was there, okay, Mary's brother. Now, this was it had to be a celebration. I mean, they are so excited. They've had to be so excited. Can you imagine what the conversations are going on in that house that day? Man, hey, Simon, how's it feel? How's it feel? Look at your cleanse, man. There's not a spot on your arms, your legs, your face. It's all gone. This never happened before. Lazarus, hey, pal, you were dead. You were buried. It was over for you, and now you're alive, and you're so alive. Look at how much you're eating, man. And it just, I mean, this is what was going on. Think of that scene. And then look at what happened. As she's doing this, the disciples return to another gospel. It was probably Judas was the spokesman. But the disciples begin to criticize and say, what are you doing? Could have sold this stuff and taken care of the poor. Not that Judas was ready to take care of the poor, but that was the excuse. And my mind could not wrap around this whole scene here. And I thought, these men looked at the worship of Mary and criticized. And my first thought was, do people think that my worship is extravagant? Now, when I talk about worship, I'm not talking about what we do here. This is part of worship. We sing and we worship God, but that's not the worship I'm talking about. I'm talking about our lifestyle. I'm talking about a lifestyle, you know, the worship of service it talks about. And it's service and worship, they're interchangeable words. And so is my life so extravagant for Jesus? Is my life about him? Is he so important to me that I'm the one when I'm hearing a Bible study, or I'm reading through the Word in the morning, or when I'm studying, or when I'm listening, or when I'm listening to praise music, or when I'm listening to the Bible read, that am I listening to see what's being said? How do I apply this? What does this mean to me about Jesus? I mean, we're in a season right now that should absolutely amaze us. We can't take for granted. We can't get because of familiarity, not realize what this season should mean to us, what Jesus Christ did for us. And I see this woman in this extravagant worship, worshiping to the point of where they look at her and say, I mean, why would you do this? I just thought, what about me? What about me? And then in the midst of this whole scene, Matthew drops this. In verse 14, he says, then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, what are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you? And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver. So from that time, he sought opportunity to betray him. I thought, wow. First of all, I see disciples upset and annoyed because of extravagant worship, and I seeing them ignoring betrayal. And it amazes me. And as I've been going through this time of grief and change that I'm going through, and many of you, we all have our areas, and I've sat before the Lord and said, Lord, I don't want to be just a follower, and I want to be a follower. I want to be so committed to you. I want to, you gave your life for me. I want to give my life to you. I want to be so extravagant in what I do. I want to be so in tune with what you're saying that I hear. I've found myself over the last few weeks, listening to the Bible read. When I'm, I listen to a lot of Christian music, and now I can sing all the songs because, every so many weeks you hear them over and over. I don't sing them anywhere like you hear them on the radio, but I sing the songs. And finally, I think the Lord said, would you please stop that? And so I've begun to listen to just the word being read to me as I'm driving places, as I'm going places. And all of a sudden, there are times I'll find my mind wandering, and gone through a chapter to do it, and I didn't hear a word that was said. I said, Lord, I'm sorry. I'll rewind it. And I'll say, Lord, I want to concentrate. I want to hear what's being said. I want to know every single thing I can in the word that applies to my relationship with you. I want to be who you've called me to be. I want to hear you speaking to me. See, this, again, I've come back to that place where this is not just ink on paper. This is God's story to us. This is God's letter to us. Jesus said, the words that I speak, they are spirit and they are life. These words are alive. And when we speak these words, hear these words, read these words, that should give us more life, no matter what we're going through. And the answers are here. And when I talk about being extravagant in our worship, I'm talking about choices that we make. Being extravagant. There was a man by the name of Mike Pilavachi, I believe his name was, and many, many years ago, he was a youth leader in a church in England. And he was talking to one of his young men there, one high school kid, and they were talking about just getting together once a week and praying, reading the word, and worshiping. Just for no other reason, just to do that. And Mike asked this young man, he said, what day should we meet? And this young man said, Saturday nights are a big night for youth and teenagers. Let's meet every Saturday night. And so they met every Saturday night, and this young man gave up, a night that was really, special to him and so forth. And he gave up his night and just worshiped and read and prayed. The man's name is Matt Redmond today, the young boy. He has written so many songs that have literally touched millions of people. The heart of worship, and on and on and on. Why? Because he was extravagant in choices. I'm going to give up the best night of the week that I have. I'm going to give that up just to worship, not expecting anything in return, not to see what he could get, but it was a choice to what could he give. See, here's the deal. Every one of us as believers, we are either going to approach Christianity or have approached Christianity as, what can I give, or what can I get? And there are so many of us as believers, so many believers, and so much of what's being taught today in so many churches is what you can get by being a child of God. What you can get by being a king's kid. What you can get by being a believer. You can get this, and you can get this, and you can get this. And and when it doesn't happen, we become like Judas. Now, there's a little bit of seed of Judas in all of us. Now, not that we would sell him out, but many times, even if we've chosen to be givers, there are times when we get disappointed. I think Judas was disappointed. He was looking for them overthrowing the Roman government. He was looking for a big change. He was looking for sitting there with the new king, because that's what they thought. And he was going to rule with this new king. He was going to be a big shot. People were going to bow down at him also. And it didn't happen. And when it didn't happen, he went and sold him out. Now, none of us would sell Jesus out, I'm sure. But when we get disappointed, we stop many times. We stop serving him. We stop worshiping. We begin to question, and we kind of give up. Anybody know what I'm talking about? And we're disappointed, even when he doesn't do those things that we think he should. Even when he doesn't do those things the way that we thought they should have been done, because the way we thought they should have been done, it was absolutely right. We were right. And I'm not being facetious. We really believed what we were, and he did something totally different. And so we become like Judas, and we may not betray him to that degree, but we betray him in the way that we stop believing. We stop trusting. Because we were following him for what we could get instead of what we could give. You know what the difference was between Mary and Judas? The difference was the cross. Mary saw the cross. She saw what it meant. She understood to her degree that she could what Jesus was going to do. Judas didn't. All he could see was what he could get from this relationship, what he could get from this situation. But when Mary saw what was going to happen, when she saw the truth of the cross, because Jesus said, she's doing this for my burial. Now think about it. That oil that she used, the size was about 12 ounces, like a Coke can. All right? Now, this costly perfume would have such a fragrance that just a dab, a tiny drop or half a drop would be enough, because it was worth a year's wage, or you would just use that much and it would be powerful fragrance. Now, can you even begin to understand the fragrance that would have filled that house when she poured the whole stinking bottle on him? And when he said, I think he was being honest, when he said, this is for my burial, he was saying, this stuff really smells. It's going to be still smelling when I'm in the grave, man. It's still going to be there, and it's going to go away, man. So it's and every one of us has to make that choice. You know, we have to make that constantly. Let me just say a couple of things, man. It says back in verse 10, but when Jesus, where he said to them, why do you trouble the woman, for he has done a good work for me? All right. The first thing I want us to see is we need to give him our best. Let me break this down real quick, just as we conclude this. We need to give him our best, not the leftovers. We need to give him our best, not what we have. You know, we're not going to use it anymore. We shouldn't exert all of our strength and all of our energy and everything. I'm not talking about finances now, please, guys. If you think I'm talking about being extravagant in our worship, I'm using the word extravagant for our lives. I'm not talking about your money or my money. That's not what I'm talking about. If we surrender our lives to Jesus Christ, if he becomes the focal point of our lives, everything else will be taken care of. We don't have to worry about anything. We don't have to talk about anything except him. And so we need to give him our best. That's what Mary did. And the other guys there, so when you give him your best, the second thing is people are going to criticize. No matter what you do for God, no matter what choices you make, no matter what decision, when you decide to do anything for the kingdom of God, when you decide to do anything for Jesus, there's going to be people that are going to question that. There's going to be people that criticize. There's going to be people that say, what in the world are you doing, man? I mean, you've got a life to live here. What do you mean you're doing? What do you mean? And they're going to be criticizing just like the disciples did. Expect that. Just expect that. But when you choose to be obedient to God, whatever that means, I'm surrendering everything in my life. I mean, I lost the best thing I had in life several weeks ago. And everything else I look around at and I say, Lord, none of it means anything. And I surrender it everything. I surrender it all to you. I surrender my lips. I surrender my thoughts. I surrender my decisions. I surrender my time, whatever it is, Lord. And I find myself wanting to reach out to people like I never did before. I find myself finding people that are hurting or going through grief or whatever, just to be able to pray for them, even on my own, just not necessarily touching everybody, but being there and caring about people. But we need to all choose. We need to come to that place. See, it's right now before Easter. And how about doing something like between now and Easter, think of some way that you can be extravagant in your worship. Now, for some of you, that may mean going and helping somebody that you know needs help. And you just give of your time and you go clean their house for them, or you go mow their lawn, or you go just spend some time with them when they don't have anybody to spend time with them, or you just be extravagant in your time maybe before Easter. Maybe you take one day or a part of a day, or maybe a couple hours. I don't know what it is, but just take some time and ask God, who can I help? What can I do? How can I just give this time to somebody else instead of me? Maybe it's being extravagant in reading the Word. Maybe you didn't start the one-year Bible. Maybe you need to do it now. Don't go backwards. Start wherever it is. Or maybe just read at your own pace. Or maybe you're reading one bit. Read more. Be extravagant. Let something else go to be extravagant for the kingdom of God. Or maybe for some of you are writers. Maybe it's writing a poem and you're giving it to somebody else to encourage them. Or maybe it's writing somebody, texting somebody, just tell them that you love them and you care about them. Somebody texted me today, and early this morning, somebody that was a friend of Wanda's, and they just texted me and said, we can't be there, just praying for you this morning. God bless you. And I was able just to send back a text that said, I am so grateful that my wife had such wonderful giving friends that are still giving, and they gave to her above and beyond anything that was expected some of the friends that she had. And I want to be that kind of friend. I want all of us to be that kind of friend, but expect to be criticized. You know, I mean, you're going to church twice a week? You go on Sundays and Wednesdays? Whew. You're a little bit radical, aren't you? Boy, I hope so. I hope so. I hope I'm so radical for the kingdom of God, man. Some of us think 30 minutes in the Word on Sunday mornings is all we need. We don't open it again. I'm not criticizing. I'm not judging anybody. Been there, done that, man. I've spent so much time in the last while of just reading the Word, studying the Word. How am I going to teach? How do I teach? What am I going to teach this week? And so I was busy taking care of my bride, and I was just trying to study, how can I teach? And so much of the time it wasn't anything that it was just a way to teach. You know, now in my extravagance, I'm just reading, studying, reading, praying. God, what do you want me to talk about this week, man? And just I hope that he's giving what he's talking. See, what I'm sharing with you this morning, what he's talking to me about, man. That's what he's talking to me about. To be extravagant for the rest of my life in my relationship with Jesus. And I think thirdly, the thing that I would say is that do it now. Because if you take a moment and look at the cross, you'll understand he's worth it. He's worth being extravagant for the kingdom of God. Well, other things will suffer. He'll take care of it. Because I read somewhere, I think it was in the Word, it might have been Reader's Digest, I read this, but it was somewhere and it said, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And all the stuff you're worried about taking care of, he said, he will take care of that stuff. So if I seek first his kingdom, if I'm extravagant in his worship, then what will happen is that everything else will be taken care of. And it works. But you need to do it now because he's worth it. Let me close with a story. There was a very famous art collector. He was a collector of paintings many years ago. His wife died, I believe it was at childbirth or when the son was very young. And so this wealthy man raised his son, and they would go on trips, and they would go to art exhibits and buy sometimes, other times not, just how he could enhance his collection. One of the greatest collections anybody had. His art collection was impeccable. It was during wartime, and his son was drafted and went to war. He received that dreaded information that his son had been killed in the line of duty and service, and went into Great Depression, and he was really depressed. And one day a young man knocked at the door. He opened the door and he said, "Sir, you don't know me, but I knew your son. We served together. In fact, he saved my life and gave his life to save my life. And I know that you're a great art collector because your son would talk about that all the time, and I felt like I know every painting that you have." And he said, "I'm not much of an artist, but I just kind of sketched out what I thought your son looked like, my perspective of your son." And he had this sketch of this man's son. He said, "Come in, sit down," and they sat and they talked for a while, and finally the father looked at him and said, "See that painting over the fireplace?" He said, "Yes, that was a hard one to get. It took us a long time to find that one. That's why it's there. But I'm taking that down, and I'd like you to help me. I'm taking that down, and I'm going to put this picture that you gave me, the place of prominence over the fireplace, because it means so much to me." A few years later, the man passed away, and the whole art community was excited about what was about to happen. They were going to auction off this man's paintings. And so they were all there. It was a time before internet, so you couldn't do it online. You had to be there. And they were all there, anxious, because he had some of the paintings that, if they could get that, it would complete their set. And so and he had them, and they'd offered to buy it before, and he wouldn't sell anything. So they were all there with their checkbooks ready to buy. Well, the auctioneer got up, said, "Our first painting." And he took out the sketch that the young man had drawn. He said, "What am I bid for this?" And you could have heard just the grumbling, the murmuring that was going through this large group of bidders, saying, "That's not what we're here for. We don't want anything to do with that. Why would we want that?" He says, "Who'll give 100? Wasn't a sound. Finally, a man stood up, kind of a scruffy-looking man, and stood up and said, I don't have a lot of money, but I did some work for this man, some handyman work, and I knew his son, and I'd like to buy that painting. I only have $10 in my pocket." The auctioneer took his gavel and pounded down, "Sold." So now all of the rest of they're shuffling in their seats. Now we get down to it. Now we're ready for the good stuff. And he began to just fold everything up and put stuff away. And they said, "What's going on?" He said, "The auction's over." "What do you mean the auction's over? You haven't auctioned off anything." He said, "Well, let me read you that part of the will." And that part of the will said, "Whoever gets the son gets everything." And I'm here to tell you this morning, whoever gets the son gets everything. Peace, love, joy, gentleness, goodness, kindness, temperance, self-control. You get everything. And as we approach this incredible event, the event that changed history, many years ago, some of you probably read the same book. I read a book called Joshua. It was a story of it was Jesus, and his name was Joshua. He was a carpenter. He came into this town, and he just changed people's lives by decisions and things that he said, and the people began to do what he did, and it was a great book. There was something missing, I thought. A lot of people were talking about it. We got to become like Jesus, and we don't become like Jesus by doing what he does or mimicking him. That's not what changes us. What changes us is his death. His death brings us from death unto life. What he did on the cross is what changes us. We can't mimic him and try to do what would Jesus do, with the bracelets and stuff. I mean, that was a cool thing, I guess, but, it's trying to, what would Jesus do? What he did is he died for me. He was nailed to that cross. He was scourged, crown of thorns, ridiculed, spit upon, nails driven through his hands and his feet, so that I could sit here today and say that Jesus loves you. And he wants you to be part of his family. And if you are part of his family, he wants you to be a little more extravagant in your worship, in your relationship. Father, as we sit before you for just a moment, as we contemplate this story of what Mary did, she saw you. She saw the cross. She understood that you were going to die. And in that death, you were going to take her sin and my sin. Every sin I've ever committed, everything I've done wrong or ever will do was nailed to that cross. And you cried out, "It is finished." What was finished? Your payment for my guilt. And I sit here today not guilty. And there are others here that sit here today not guilty because we've received what the Son has done for us. And we get the rest. We get everything else. We get peace. We get a relationship. We get your word. We get the goal of heaven, eternity with you, and a reconciliation, a reunion with our loved ones that knew you, Lord. God, let us approach this Easter like we've never approached it before, with an awe, with the wonder, with the same heartfelt emotion that Mary approached your death. Help us to approach your death on that cross for us. Bless you, sweet Jesus.